Hi, my name is Mark Endsley, and I'm applying for your Director of College and Career Readiness position. I'll interview on Friday. This is the advanced video that was requested. I want to talk briefly about my background and experience, but since I sent you pretty extensive paperwork on that, I'll just highlight some things that I hope you'll attend to. But mostly what I want to talk about is what I think looking forward I could bring to your district in support of your schools achieving the goals that are measured in the high school success measure, Measure 98. Um, I've done a lot of that work in the past, including working with ODE to develop the criteria that they're using to have plans developed. I facilitated some of those sessions and provided guidance in terms of where I thought they might be successful in helping schools achieve the goals that they had and that the measure lays out. So first I'll touch on a couple of highlights from my background that I think are key to this position, and then I'll talk more about what I think the process is, my philosophy and process for working on this kind of tool, this kind of initiative and school improvement in general. So first off, my background with the Oregon University system involved an extensive amount of work on post-secondary transitions and education across sectors. But one of the things that I experienced early on was I attended a session with the Education Trust and Katie Haycock, and their philosophy was that college begins in kindergarten. And I kind of took that to heart at the time, and I tried to think about how that looked. And for me, philosophically, that notion isn't about just going to four-year universities. It was always about what does post-secondary education look like for students that all are going to be heading for careers. That includes job training on the site. It includes community college training, certificates, degrees, but it also includes the 4 years. And so trying to think about how you help students understand that notion that graduation is a super important milestone, but it's also not the end point anymore. So how do you prepare yourself to get where you want to be? How do you set goals that help you understand that there's a purpose to education and that to get to that purpose, you have to plan ahead? And so I built a lot of systems for doing that. And I've done a lot of training in schools around the country to help them accomplish it. So I think that's sort of a summation of philosophically how I feel about this, is that not everybody is going to four-year universities. That tends, though, to be, especially in the No Child Left Behind era, what we articulate. We articulate our graduation requirements, and we articulate four-year university pathways. So what happens for students that aren't headed that way? What about the welder, the hospitality student? How do they understand what they need to do to be qualified? I've helped several districts build pathway programs to do that, using their course catalogs to say, you have existing courses in place, but if students don't know to take them in a certain sequence and which combinations of things will work for them, how are they supposed to know? And how are, frankly, educators that may not have that background supposed to know? It doesn't mean that it all needs to be published in a course catalog. That would be, a phone book size document. But how do educators, whether it's through advisory programs or counseling programs, understand how to guide them when they come in our meeting to help them understand how to succeed? So that I think is a key piece, is that, really articulating, communicating about the alternatives and how you get there, is an important part of this whole process, an important part of this job, I think, based on the goals that I saw you setting. Um, the major efforts with the High School Success Act really are, as you know, dropout prevention, career and technical education development, and early college opportunities. Each of those has its own unique characteristics. I've done a lot of support around that in various places, and am quite familiar with the alternatives that people have in different districts depending on their circumstances. But I also recognize that schools, especially in a large school district and a diverse school district, have unique characteristics. So one of the first steps, I guess, that I would say has to happen is recognizing what the needs of the community in a school, around a school, and students in the school, and educators in the school need. There are various levels of preparation that have happened already in various places, depending on leadership, depending on experience of the teaching staff, depending on the interactions that they've had with community partners and students and teachers. And so it's really important, I think, to do some need sensing initially. And that involves really listening carefully to what's happening and what they believe they can do. My tendency, as I've gotten older, is to really try to facilitate and not dictate. Early on, I did a lot of trainings where it's the more traditional mode of, standardized, here's what you need to do. And I learned that really wasn't very effective. What I learned was that I need to be able to be prepared to offer tools and structures for people to succeed and learn, listen, and add my 2 cents when I feel it's appropriate, as opposed to sort of, being front and center. So the most of the effort that I provide to a position like this is in the planning and the preparation and the construction and adaptations of a lot of tools that I already have, but also development of new ones when I recognize a new need. So that's sort of the philosophical underpinnings of what I'd bring. In terms of the specifics, once the needs assessment is done, I think the next step is really to help schools plan and figure out what do we need to accomplish here, and what approach do we want to take. And that's where those tools I just mentioned come in. So I can bring things to the table that make it efficient for them to do various things. So for example, professional learning communities. They're common and considered best practice, but a lot of times the observations that I've made show that schools, when they don't provide structure, just end up with sort of griping sessions. So what I built were administrator and practitioner tools in order to make sure that there were structured conversations about student work, both instruction, data, and assessment, frankly, more broadly. So that's one key piece. Another important component of this is the CTE element. My vita will show that I actually helped the state of Oregon build pathways through the Community College and Workforce Development Department in order to help them communicate to students what they needed to do to prepare and also where to go if they had certain interests. That still is in existence on the web. But I also did that in other school districts, and that involved especially a couple key components. One is that I built tools for externships for teachers to re-engage with industry partners in order to observe current practice, because the practices have changed dramatically over the last few years. So if you've been out of the field for 5 years and in the classroom, you may not know exactly what's going on. So we built I built professional development tools in order to help structure that experience, so that when someone went in, they knew what to look for, what to observe, what to keep track of, and then how to reflect on it. And then how to translate that into curriculum and instruction. That extends to internships for students as well. So I've got specific tools for that to help students know that it's not just a job shadow, you're not just following somebody around. There are things that you're looking for and things you're trying to learn. The other aspect of it is the community partners coming into schools. And that involves parents as well, trying to think about how do we value the input of parents and get their feedback and not use what's commonly called the protective model, where it's just come to our, student-parent conferences, and at best, student-led conferences. But, how do we include them and make them feel important? And sometimes that means we have to go to them. Sometimes it means we can provide opportunities for them to come to us, and all that's important. And then the other side of that is that in 2 big, diverse school districts, Louisville and Anchorage, Alaska, I built tools for them to bring in community partners to speak to students. And the traditional method for that, as I was observing it, was that people would come in, they'd talk about what they did, students were bored, the community partner was at least nominally insulted because nobody was paying attention, and they wouldn't come back. So I've got tools to help build lesson plans with the community partner and the partnering teacher to help students experience what that person actually does in their field. And that's been extremely successful. Anchorage has used it for years, and it has had high success rates and high return rates. So has Louisville. And I've used it in other districts as well and introduced it. Arts and Technology Academy in Eugene, Pasco in Washington, and other places where they're able to now bring people in with a meaningful role and give students meaningful experiences to find out what kinds of things they like and don't like. So that's something I can bring to the district. So the basic cycle of all this, I would say, is based on my inquiry background. And I've translated that into my professional development and administrative work in the sense that there's a cycle of planning first, identifying goals, identifying, projected needs and strategies, implementing those and translating that into instruction, thinking about, and this is key, the data that you're going to gather to find out whether things are working or not, and how to evaluate that, and then reflecting and deciding these things worked, these things didn't so much. What do we do about that? And it's been an effective cycle in a variety of settings. And it's something that I would want to bring to the district in order to have a repetitive cycle. We have had a tendency in education, at least in my lifetime, maybe even further back, to think that, okay, we provided a training, everybody should just go back to their classrooms and do it. But then the next year, we do something different. And so people get cynical. And I think having a long-term strategy that is, a plan that is not just a year, but multi-year, is key to making these kinds of efforts work. So I would want to, try to build that support in working individually with schools, but also collectively with the district, to make sure that we had a long-range planning process for making sure we could meet the needs of each and every student. So that's another key. In terms of instruction, best practices, I've worked with virtually every content area you could think of. And it's not because I'm an expert in all of them, but it's because I translated my practice into facilitation and process, and making sure that I could maximize the expertise of the people in the room, not because I was trying to teach them something myself. And it's not that I never have an opinion, and I have a pretty eclectic background, so I often have experience with almost every subject in one way or another. I've seen, plenty of conversations with really expert teachers in my career, so I've got things to add usually, but I don't start with that. I insert it as they're having conversations and I see them getting stuck or hung up, or they're missing something that I think is important. So that's critical to me too. In terms of assessment and data, I'm known nationally actually as an assessment person. I've done statewide assessments in multiple states, both multiple choice, alternative assessments. I've also done a ton of district work at all levels, from selected response to, broad performance assessment, interdisciplinary performance assessment even. So I think I can bring that to the table. And I think the evidence piece, which is a key part of all of this, is important, because student engagement involves all three of the key aspects of the student success process. You have to engage them, they have to know what they're doing, why they're doing it. And as educators, we have to know what to do if they're not getting there. And that involves more than just external assessments and data points. It also involves collaboration and conversation and real evaluation of what are students accomplishing, and if they're falling short, what do we do about it? So that's really important to me. So for me, the notion of the whole process does come down to equity. I've done a lot of work with equity, and who knew the white guy from Roseburg would become the expert at Education Northwest for that. But I started in a really diverse school, a really poor school, and I intuitively knew I had to do things to reach my students, and then later researched it and built tools for conversation, because the white workforce is dominant, in education. It's a reality. And as a scientist, I know that inherent bias is kind of unavoidable. It's the way we organize our thinking. We can't categorize things, we can't keep track of things if we don't, do that. So I've worked in multiple districts to help facilitate that process so that people don't feel criticized, they feel energized. And that's something else that I'd want to bring, is how do we deal with the diverse needs of all students without feeling like we're the ones that are the problem. So in closing, I think I can bring a lot to your district. I have a lot of both experience, but also a lot of vision and creativity. And I look forward to talking to you further at the interview. Thank you.